Good evening, friends. Let's stand up to our feet. I greet you this evening in the name of the Lord. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
In this gorgeous day. This is the day the Lord has made, so therefore, let us rejoice and be glad in it. Well, good evening and welcome to our Bible study tonight. My name is Andrew Forrest. I'm the senior pastor, and here's the question we're going to be asking. Which of the 12 sons of Jacob, which is the one who's going to lead the family into the future? This is one of the best stories in the Bible or out of it. It's psychologically complex. It's emotionally compelling. It'll break your heart. It'll infuriate you. It'll inspire you. We're going to look at it tonight, and I can't wait. But with all that in mind, why don't you turn to like 17 neighbors this evening and say, good evening, glad to see you. Shake a few hands. All right, friends, why don't we remain standing? And here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a prayer. Now, why are we praying? Because what does depend on us is approaching the Bible with curiosity and actually an open mind. People talk about being open-minded, but very few people are. We're going to try to be open-minded tonight and come at the Bible with a sense of curiosity and wonder. That's on us. Our heart is on us. But then what's on the Lord is to use the words and breathe life into us. So with all that in mind, why don't you take a breath, forget about your homework and where you're traveling tomorrow and what's happening on weekend and what's happening in the college football playoff rankings. Just be here, be present, and let's pray. So come, thou almighty King, help us thy name to sing. We come to sing thy praise. Father, all glorious, o'er all victorious, come and reign o'er us, thou ancient of days. That's our prayer this evening, Lord. And we pray that you would take my words and speak through them. And we pray, Lord, you take our thoughts and think through them. Open your word to us. Give us insight and clarity and life. And then, God, we pray that you take our hearts, and as a result of this, fill us with love to love our neighbor and love you and love your world. And we pray this in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And everybody said, amen. You may be seated. If you can reach a Bible, you're probably going to want one tonight. Things will be on the screen as well. We're going to look at a ton of Bible verses tonight. Why? Because this whole section is one coherent story. And here's what you have to be thinking. You need to be thinking of this as a cinematographer. You need to be approaching the story of Joseph and his 11 brothers like the prestige television shows, like Mad Men, like Breaking Bad, like Game of Thrones. And I'm not being funny, none of these shows that I watch, but I hear they're convoluted, very psychologically compelling shows. Because that is what's happening here in the Joseph story. Reminder, Abraham is the founder, his son is Isaac, and then the next one is Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons with 4 different women. So I've given you a nice little emoji family tree on the back of your handout. And the question is, which of the 12 sons is going to lead the family after their father is gone? And it's not just an esoteric question, because the future of God's plan to rescue the world depends on the answer to that question. I'm particularly pleased tonight to have everybody here who's here, but I want to also particularly call out our middle school and high school students who are here. And we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. So thank you all for coming. And y'all are going to see that though we love the adults, most of them are too cowardly to ask questions. So you're going to have to ask the questions for them tonight, and they're going to be glad you did. That's our deal. Here we go. Turn to Genesis chapter 37. One of the most famous stories in the Bible or out of it. If you've ever been to Sunday school or been in church or had a kid's Bible, you've probably heard this story, but you haven't heard this story. Here we go. Verse 2, chapter 37. These are the generations of Jacob. Now, pull out your handy-dandy family tree. You'll see that Jacob has a wife named Leah, and they have 4 sons together. 1, Reuben. 2, Simeon. 3, Levi. 4, Judah. Then Rachel, the younger sister, is jealous, and she gives her servant to Jacob and says, well, I will raise up the children through her because Rachel can't get pregnant. So he has with her sons number 5 and number 6. And then Leah gets jealous, and so she gets in on the action by sending her servant to Jacob, with whom Jacob has sons 7 and 8. And then Leah herself gets pregnant, and they have sons 9 and 10. And then finally Rachel, the beloved wife, has son 11, and then she actually dies in childbirth with son number 12. Come back to the story, Genesis chapter 37. Joseph, the 11th son, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. So presumably, the other brothers, some of them are much older than Jacob. If he's 17, they are adults. They are adults. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now, Israel, let's pause. I've given you a little on your handout, flip it over. Jacob was the name they called him on his birth certificate. But when he wrestles with God, he is given the name Israel. So why sometimes is he called Jacob and sometimes is he called Israel? I've given you a little inset on your handout. The answer is, when Jacob is acting like an ordinary guy, he's Jacob. But when he's sort of acting in the role of the patriarch, the founder of the people, they call him Israel. And you're going to see that played out over the next several weeks in our reading. Sometimes he's Israel, sometimes he's Jacob. That's a good rule of thumb. Here we go. Israel, verse 3, chapter 37, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors, sort of a strange Hebrew phrase. We're not totally sure what it means. Maybe it means it has long sleeves, but obviously, he's wearing the thing that makes it clear to everybody that his dad loves him more than his brothers. But when his brothers, verse 4, saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said, guys, listen to the dream. We were binding sheaves in the field, and my sheaf arose and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered around and they bowed down. Guys, what do you think it could mean? His brother said, okay. Verse 8, you're going to reign over us? You're going to rule over us? They hated him even more. Then he dreamed another dream. He told it to his brothers. Hey, guys, I dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars are bowing down to me. What do you guys think it could mean? But when he told it to his father and his brothers, verse 10, his father rebuked him and said, what are you talking about? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow yourselves to the ground to you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. Jacob himself has had famous dreams where God reveals something to him. So Jacob, although frustrated with Joseph, sort of says, I wondered. Now, we don't know yet what we're going to know as we read along, but Joseph is obviously brilliant, obviously. And I think Jacob, the father, sees that in his son. Okay, here we go. Verse 12. Now, I need you not to think of this like a children's Bible. I need you to think of this in the actual violence that was really there. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Go, I'll send you to them. He said, here I am. So he said to him, go and see if it's well with your brothers and bring me word. So he sent him to the valley of Hebron and came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering. He said, I'm looking for my brothers. He said, oh, they went to Dothan. Verse 18. So then they saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. Men have a tendency towards violence. This is one of the aspects of the male character. It doesn't mean that women can't be violent, doesn't mean that all men are violent, but men have a tendency toward violence, and everybody in every culture that's ever existed besides our current one obviously recognize this. It's like the most obvious thing. And one of the things that marriage does is that the marriage between a man and a woman helps tame some of the violence of the male character. But here you have 10 brothers. Joseph is the 11th, and the little one, Benjamin's not here. You have 10 brothers, all young men, all wanting their father's approval and the wealth that comes with it. And when you have too many young men together, violence can be the result. I mean, think about gangs, or think of them in prisons. This is a very violent story. Let's kill him. Verse 21, but when Reuben heard it, now Reuben is the firstborn. Which brother is going to lead the family? Maybe it's Reuben. Reuben says, let's not take his life. Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. Because Reuben's plan was to rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, now again, do not think sanitized children's Bible version. How do you actually move somebody into a place he doesn't want to go? You ever see that video from a couple years ago? It's a really strange circumstance where that guy refuses to be removed from the Delta flight, and he bumps his head and he's bleeding and they're trying to get him out. I mean, even a little kid who just goes totally limp is really hard to move. Imagine a 17-year-old boy. Look, verse 23. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, because this is the robe that signifies that their father loves him more than them. And they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Now, again, they're not taking him and gingerly placing him down and saying, are you okay, Joseph? We just want you to be all right. He's got to be bleeding. What, did he have a fracture? Did he have a compound fracture? Is he bleeding from his head? Did he break his nose? What happened as he was fighting? Is he crying out? Is he screaming? Guys, stop, stop, stop. Are they yelling at him? This is a very violent story. He ends up down in the pit. And then look what they do. You know, sometimes you hear like gang violence, and they kill somebody in cold blood, and then they still stay in the house and play the Xbox or something, you know, and you read your stomach as revulsion later. Look at this. They sit down to eat. This boy, he's 17 years old, he's a child, screaming to be rescued. They sit down to eat. And we're gonna see later, they sit down close enough to hear his cries. And in cold blood, they sit down to eat, verse 25. And then they see a caravan of Ishmaelites. And then Judah's the fourth one. Pay attention. Judah says, what good is it to us if we kill him? Let's sell him. Because he's our brother, our own flesh. I mean, it's almost like, oh, Judah, you have such a generous heart. Let's just sell him into slavery. And his brothers listened to him. I wonder which brother is going to lead the family. Now, one of the aspects of the brother that's going to lead the family is that he's got to be a leader. Well, here we see that his brothers listened to Judah, son number 4. The Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit. They sell him for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Now, verse 29, when Reuben is the eldest comes back, he tears his clothes. He says, the boy is gone. Where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. So blood, when it first comes out and hits the air, is red. But very quickly when it dries, it turns brown. Think about the brown stains on the torn coat. And they sent the robe of many colors, and they brought it to their father. They said, "Hey, Pop, we found this. Could this be Joseph's?" He identified it and said, "Yeah, it's my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him." Now, here's an interesting thought. Does Jacob know that his sons are lying to him about Joseph? We don't know. The narrator doesn't tell us, but reading between the lines, I think it's at least plausible that Jacob knows that his 10 bloodthirsty sons are lying to him and have just murdered his precious 11th son. Now remember, in Genesis 4 verses 6 and 7, I talked about this last Sunday. God says to Cain, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is to control you, but you must master it. The image is of a man who's gonna become like an animal. And what happens through Genesis is although people were created to be above the animals, to take care of them, to love them, to make more things out of it, to be like shepherds of all the animals, because people have rebelled against God, they become like the animals. They tear at each other. They're violent and bloodthirsty. So look, Jacob says, this is 33, verse 33, a fierce animal has devoured him. Well, you know what? In some sense, that's exactly what happened. And there's just a part of me that wonders if Jacob knows what his sons have done somehow. He knows that it's the violence that his sons have done. And maybe, Jacob is an older man here, maybe he's actually afraid of these 10 headstrong, bloodthirsty men. They're not boys. This is not a bunch of 12-year-olds in the buttercream gang. These are violent 20 and perhaps even 30-year-old men. Verse 34, Jacob tore his garments, put sackcloth, and mourned his son. All his sons and his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, "No, I should go down to Sheol. That's the place of the dead, to my son mourning." Verse 36, the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. The screen goes black. Episode 1 finishes. What's going to happen? I'm just telling you, if I had a pile of money, I would tithe on it. I'd give it to the church. And then I would want to make this into like not a Christian movie, like prestige television. Put it on HBO, put it on Netflix, put it on one of the Apple streaming channels. This is a powerful, powerful story. And like any great story, they don't hit you over the head and just tell you this is what you're supposed to think. Because look how episode 2 begins. Now, if you've ever read through the Bible, when you get to episode 2, chapter 38, you say, why is that in here? Exactly. Here we go. All we know is that the father thinks that Joseph is dead, whether by the hands of his son or by sons or a wild animal, we don't know. And Joseph has been taken crying and screaming to Egypt. And Genesis 38 begins. Well, about that time, Judah, son number 4, went down from his brothers and turned aside to his buddy Hira. And Judah saw the daughter of a Canaanite. He marries her. She has a son, his name is She conceives again, verse 4, she has another son named Onan. She has another son, verse 5, named Shelah. So Judah has 3 sons. And Judah has a wife for his firstborn son, her name is Tamar. Verse 7, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord put him to death. All we know, he's a bad guy. And then this weird thing happens, very strange, not our culture, okay? Not our culture. But you're not gonna understand the Bible if you come at it from 2022. You have to understand the Bible from ancient Canaanite culture. Well, in the ancient world, a woman is not safe, is not cared for unless she's attached to a man who can care for her. So when she's a girl, she's cared for and made safe by her father. When she is a woman, she is cared for and made safe by her husband. And then when her husband died, and of course men die before women often, except in childbirth, then she's cared for and made safe by her sons. So Tamar, now that she's a young widow, has nobody to care for her. So the process is the brother fathers a child through her, but it's not going to be the brother's son. It's going to be his late brother, dead brother's son. Strange, but this, you have to understand it in the story. So Judah said to Onan, verse 8, go to your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law. Verse 9, but Onan knew the kid's not going to be his kids. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste his semen on the ground because he didn't want to have her conceive. Verse 10, what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord. He put him to death. Then Judah said, after both his sons have died, before the third one, Judah says, why don't you go back to your dad's house? And then when my son grows up, he can marry you. But the real reason is Judah was afraid that this girl was cursed, and he didn't want his third son to marry her. So she goes back. Well, after a while, Judah's wife dies. So he's a widower. And after a while, he goes and sees his buddy again. And Tamar, verse 13, she hears, hey, your former father-in-law, who was supposed to take care of you, he's up at this place. Verse 14, so she takes off her widow's garments, covers herself up, puts a veil on so you can't see her, and she stays at this place because she saw that Judah was not taking care of her and giving her in marriage the third son. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He said, hey, let me go into you. He wants to have sex with her. He didn't know that it was his daughter-in-law. She said, okay, what are you going to pay me? He says, I'll give you a young goat. She says, okay, but before that happens, you need to promise me. I need some way to know. He says, how shall I pledge it? Verse 18. She says, your signet and your cord and your staff. She says, give me your phone and your ID and your car keys. He says, sure, absolutely. And guess what? They have sex and she gets pregnant. She goes away. Later on, verse 20, Judah tries to pay off his debt. He wants to pay the prostitute. He sends the goat. He didn't find her. And he asked the guys, hey, where's the prostitute that was here? Where's the hooker? And they go, there wasn't anybody here. And he returned. He said, I don't know. Judah said, oh, okay. Well, she better keep my stuff or else I'll be looked like a fool. I shall be laughed at, verse 23. Verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. She's pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, let's bring her out and kill her. Let her be burned. And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. And the friend brings it to Judah, and he sees what was in the hand. Think about that moment. And Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he didn't have sex with her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, his brother came out. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. And they called him Perez. And afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread, and they called his name Zerah. Episode 2 fades to black, is over. And you're thinking, this is why I don't read the Bible. And this is absolutely why I don't want my kids reading the Bible. What a strange, convoluted story. Now, I can't help but telegraph a little bit, but turn to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1. This is what you skip over at Christmas, but you shouldn't. It's powerful. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, verse 2. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. In the genealogy of Jesus Messiah is mentioned this evil detail, this strange, troubling story. This is a whole nother Bible study and a whole nother sermon. But look how God can pull beautiful things out of complete disasters. Go back to Genesis 38. So we are sitting there, you're with your family, you got your popcorn, it's the second week of the big show, and you're thinking, what did we just watch? Why is this here? And it fades to black, and the narrator doesn't tell us. You gotta keep reading. Week 3 begins, everybody ready? Genesis 39, back to the story. Now Joseph, Genesis 39:1, had been brought down to Egypt. Now in the Bible, always and everywhere, you go up to Jerusalem and down everywhere else, because Jerusalem is like the spiritual high point. Now in Jerusalem today, Mount Zion, the hill, is like a tall hill. Even the Mount of Olives across the Kidron Valley is taller than Mount Zion. If you ever go to Mount Olives, you can look down into Jerusalem. But nevertheless, like spiritually, Jerusalem is the highest place in the world. So if you were on Mount Everest and you go to Jerusalem, you go up to Jerusalem, but you go down away from it. And look where Joseph is going, down, away. It's like he's going into exile. It's like he's being separated from the promised land and from the people of God. He's going into exile, down to Egypt. And Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him and brought him down there. Now, the narrator doesn't like to waste too many words, but look what he says. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man and was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw the Lord was with him. The Lord caused all that he did to succeed. Hey, y'all remember, what does the Lord say to Abraham in Genesis 12? Through you, all the nations of the world shall be blessed. Those who bless you, I will bless. God says to Abraham and his family, I am going to use you to just bring blessing wherever you go. Isn't that awesome? To think about even today, because we are Abraham's family, adopted into Abraham's family, where the Lord is worshiped, we bring blessing. It's better in your neighborhood when there's a God-fearing family in that neighborhood. It changes the dynamic of the neighborhood. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you were at school, and then you had a friend who now goes to church with you, or you see somebody from another church, and you know this friend is a good friend. And having that friend there has changed the dynamic of the class, or the team, or at work. You know how that works. Everything that Joseph does is great. Verse 4, so Joseph keeps getting more and more authority. He's in charge of the whole house. The blessing of the Lord was on him, everything that he did. Verse 6, the guy lets Joseph do anything he wants. Now, Joseph is good looking. And after a while, verse 7, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph. And he said, she propositions him, let's sleep together. Remember, there's this great pattern in the Bible where people see what they want, and they desire it, and they try to take it. See, desire, take. It's always bad. Look, Joseph says, verse 8, I can't do this. My master has allowed me to be in charge of everything. This is wrong. I'm not going to do it. And verse 10, she keeps trying to get him to do it. But then one day, she concocts this story while she's in the house and he's there alone with her. And then she grabs part of his garment again. And she says, look, he tried to rape me, verses 14 and following. And he's laughing at me, verse 19. When Potiphar hears it, he gets real mad. Verse 20, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. The obvious implication that you would draw is that Joseph has the worst luck in the world. But look what the narrator says, verse 21. Well, actually, the Lord's with Joseph, and he showed him his steadfast love, and he kept blessing him, and the keeper of the prison put him in charge of everything. Verse 23, the guy that was in charge of the prison, he didn't even pay attention to the prison because the Lord was with Joseph. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. And then this week comes to a close, fade to black, and the local news begins. Episode after episode after episode. So here we are. You thought it was bad before, separated from your family, but now Joseph finds himself accused of rape in a foreign land, and he's in the prison. But the Lord is with him. So then I'm going to skip over some of these details because you know the basic story. Joseph is in prison, and he has great skill given to him by God to interpret dreams. And there's two guys in the prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and Pharaoh's baker. And Joseph says, hey guys, I'll tell you the meaning of these dreams, but please when you get out, remember me. And it doesn't go well, and the baker is beheaded, and the cupbearer just totally forgets. So skipping all the way ahead, verse 22. Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had said he would, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. The episode comes to a close. You're thinking, what's happening? Where is this story going? Well, next week begins. 2 years pass. He has been in prison for 2 whole years from that moment. Now, how long he's been estranged from his family, we don't know. By the way, have you ever wondered why Joseph doesn't try to send a letter back to his dad? Hey, Dad, I'm here in Egypt. I'm in prison, or I got out of prison, or I'm a big shot in Egypt as he's about to be. Love to hear from you. Send a postcard. We talked about this week in our pastor's Bible study, and Pastor Stacy, I think, raised the point, and we were talking about this. It's certainly possible that Joseph believes his father knows where he is and lets him stay there. Remember, Joseph doesn't know what happened after his brothers sold him into slavery. I think it's absolutely plausible that Joseph may feel forgotten by everybody in the world, even his own father. Think about all the sleepless nights he has in the prison to go over the scenario over and over and over again. What Judah said, what Reuben said, what it felt like, the bruises and scrapes and blood on his body being thrown down here, the terror being stripped of his robe and sold into slavery. So Joseph is in prison. And then Pharaoh, chapter 41, Pharaoh has the famous dreams, remember? 7 fat cows, and then 7 skinny cows, and the skinny cows eat up the fat cows, but they say skinny. And Pharaoh is really troubled. Now, the reason why today you go to Cairo and then visit the Great Pyramids, the reason Egypt was such an amazing society is because of the technological innovations they had with the irrigation from the Nile River, which would irrigate all that part of the desert. Well, if you have water, you become wealthy and powerful. And so Egypt is a powerful nation. But its success depends on its agriculture. And Pharaoh is troubled by this dream. Now, verse 41. None of the smart guys in Egypt can figure it out. And the cupbearer says to Pharaoh, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I remember. Mr. Pharaoh, remember when you were real mad and you put me and the baker, whom you killed, in custody? We had dreams, and there's this Hebrew guy, verse 12, and we told him, and he knew what the dreams meant. Oh yeah, and again, you put me back in my job, but you killed the baker. I don't want to bring it up, but you need to know this. Verse 14, then Pharaoh, listen to this. Now imagine the moment in the television series. Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. They're bringing him up out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. So the Egyptians are clean shaven. And maybe he also shaved every hair on his head, and he's made presentable. I mean, think about how filthy he would have been for years. He's cleansed, and he's put in new clothes, and he comes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said, here's the dream, verse 15, nobody can tell me what it is. And Joseph says, verse 25, I'll tell you what it is. You're going to have 7 great years, and then you're going to have 7 really bad years, verse 27. And this is what's going to happen. And it's going to be the worst thing you've ever seen. And verse 32, it's going to happen. God proves it's going to happen. And then listen to Joseph. Now, is he sharp? Is he shooting his shot here? Is it his one shot? I don't know. Look what he says. Here's what I would do, Pharaoh. I'm not you. Just putting it out there. You should pick a really smart guy. And I'd put him in charge and then follow this plan and let them gather the food, verse 35. Verse 37, Pharaoh was pleased. And Pharaoh said, where are we going to get this guy? And I remember Joseph just like, Verse 39, Pharaoh says, actually, I'm picking you, man. Verse 40, you're going to be over my house and my people. Only person bigger than you is me. Look, verse 42, I'm giving you the ring and putting the clothes on you and the gold chain, and you're going to ride in the second chariot. And they called out before him, bow the knee. It's almost as if Joseph becomes like the image of Pharaoh. Where have we heard that language before? Oh, remember, the people that God created are supposed to represent God in the image of God. He created them, male and female, he created them. And here you have Joseph like a living image of Pharaoh going before him. Joseph acts in place of Pharaoh, cares for the land as if he's Pharaoh. Verse 45, this is a key point. Well, he gets a new name, Zephanath-Paneah, an Egyptian name, and he marries an Egyptian lady. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Verse 46, he's 13 years old when this happens. How old was he when he is beaten up by his brothers and sold into slavery? 17, so it's 13 years later. And here he is, and everything that Joseph does is awesome because he's totally the man. And he has 2 kids, verses 50, 51. 51, the first one's name is Manasseh. The second one, verse 52, is named Ephraim. And everything that Joseph said, it happens. And then the famine comes, verse 54 and 55. And Pharaoh says, go to Joseph, do what he says. Well, Joseph, who had been taking care of the land, verse 56, he sells it, and everybody has food. And scene, fade to black. Now, we have not heard anything about the other sons of Jacob for a long time, for over a decade. And here we go, the story picks up again. Now, let me just ask you, if you were deciding now, if you had a vote now, like it was one of the betting markets, what would the odds makers at Vegas say about who is going to be the son who's going to lead the family after Jacob is gone? The obvious betting favorite should be Joseph. He's in charge of all of Egypt. He's obviously totally brilliant, and God just blesses him, and anything he touches just turns to gold. But there's 2 little things we just heard. One is, he has an Egyptian name, and 2, he marries an Egyptian lady who's actually the daughter of an Egyptian priest. I wonder if one of the temptations of Joseph's life is to become too Egyptian. Here we go. So, verse 42, we go back to Jacob and the sons. We haven't looked at them for the last 6 weeks in our television program, but here we are. Or maybe even this is season 2. Season 1 ended with the famine, and season 2 begins here. I love this, so funny. This is Genesis 42:1. When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, why are you standing here looking at one another? Why are you standing here like a bunch of idiots? Why do you look at one another? Go buy some grain or else we're going to die. So, verse 3. Remember, there's 12 sons in total. Joseph is the 11th, and then the little baby is Benjamin, the 12th. And Benjamin's mom died while she was in childbirth. Verse 3, 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain, but Jacob did not send Benjamin because he was afraid. So the sons of Israel came. Now, remember, Joseph is now thoroughly Egyptian. He speaks Egyptian. These guys don't speak Egyptian, they speak Hebrew. Verse 6, Joseph is the governor. Verse 7, just again, think of it in terms of cinematography. He recognizes his brothers, but he's rude to them. Where'd you come from? Verse 8, Joseph recognizes his brothers. They didn't recognize him. Verse 9, and Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed. Can you imagine that moment? And then look what he says. You're spies. Does anybody remember what the brothers hated about Joseph way back decades before? When he would come and spy on them for their father. Remember that? And then look, what we're going to see is that Joseph activates in the inverse way all the things they did to him or said about him. And so he says, "You're spies." And they go, "No, we're not." And he says, "You just want to see what we're doing." They say, No, we're not spies. You're spies. You can't go until your youngest brother comes here." And so he put them all in custody together, verse 17, for 3 days. So he's gotten the information from them that they have a youngest brother who's not there and the father who's back home. And he's messing with them. They're in there for 3 days. And then verse 18, Joseph says, "Okay, I'll let you live. Give me one of the brothers, and the rest of you go back and bring your youngest brother with you." Verse 21. And then they're talking in Hebrew because they think Joseph can't understand it. Listen to this. Listen to this. You know, like Lady Macbeth, how she's haunted by the murder? She's haunted by the murder. In truth, verse 21, we are guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we didn't listen. So this has been how many years later? We're not sure. 15 years later, maybe more? Wait, no. Way longer than that. Decades later, because we've had the 7 years and the 7 years. So this is 27 years later, if my math is correct. They still remember what it was like to hear that 17-year-old child crying out for mercy. Look, we saw it. He begged us, we didn't listen. And this is why this is happening to us. Reuben said, "Didn't I tell you not to do this? But you didn't listen. So now comes a reckoning for his blood." They didn't know that Joseph understood him, for there was an interpreter between them. But he turned away from them and wept. He hears them remembering the moments when he was crying out in terror, and it's so overwhelming that he can't be there. He turns aside and cries. And he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Let's pause here. I'm going to engage in a little bit of conjecture that'll help sort of illustrate the moment. Remember, the eldest son is Reuben. You can look on the back of your sheet. And the second sons are Simeon, number 2, and Levi, number 3, and Judah, number 4. Which son is going to lead the family after their father is gone? Well, we'll see about Reuben. Reuben, to me, is the Job Bluth of the book of Genesis. If you ever watch Arrested Development, you understand the reference. Reuben is not a natural leader. We're going to see. We've already seen. Guess what? When Reuben talks, nobody listens to him. Nobody listens to him. We're going to see that very clearly in just a little bit. Nobody listens to Reuben. Not only that, turn to Genesis 35, a very nasty little story. Genesis 35. Genesis 35:22. This is immediately following the death of Rachel, the mother of Joseph and Benjamin. Rachel dies in childbirth. Immediately after she dies, look what happens. Verse 22. While Israel lived in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. So Reuben is the eldest son. And when Rachel dies in childbirth, Reuben goes and has sex with Rachel's maid, who is the mother of 2 of his half-brothers. And Jacob the father hears of it, Israel the father, and he does nothing. Remember when I preached on this? I think the primal temptation of men is toward passivity. And if ever there was a time when you needed to have a father who exercised responsibilities, it's a father of 12 sons. Reuben here does this nasty thing, sleeps with the mother of 2 of his half-brothers, and Jacob says nothing about it. And the narrator just moves on. So what we know about Reuben, first of all, is that nobody listens to him when he talks, and also he has this black mark next to his name. Okay, I paused the DVR. They're there with Joseph. Joseph is angry. They're all upset. I'm giving you a little background. Now, the next 2 boys are Simeon and Levi. So then, turn to one of the nastiest stories in the whole Bible, Genesis chapter 30. Where is it? It's 34. Genesis 34. Jacob shows up back in the promised land with his big family. And he has a precious daughter named Dinah. And they don't take care of Dinah. So Dinah, verse 34, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land, verse 2, 34:2. And when Shechem saw her, he rapes her. Verse 3, but he wants her. And he says to his dad, hey, I want to marry her. Verse 4. Verse 5, Jacob heard that his daughter had been raped, but his sons were not with him. So his sons are his army. I mean, these are scrapping, violent men. Jacob doesn't do anything about it. And when his sons come back, verse 6, the father of the rapist says, hey, we want to marry your daughter. Verse 7, Dinah's brothers are really angry because he had done an outrageous thing by lying with Jacob's daughter. But Hamor said, hey, verse 8, my son wants to marry your daughter. Let's get married. Let's make a plan. You can be here and be part of our people. Verse 11, Shechem says, hey guys, I want to be your friends. Let's work together. Hey, I'll pay whatever you want. I really want this woman. Verse 13, well, the brothers of Dinah, the sons of Jacob, they answered deceitfully because of the rape. They said, we're not going to do this. But if everybody gets circumcised, then you can marry her because that's kind of our rule. Verse 18, they say, okay, we'll do it. So they said, verse 20, yeah, we're going to do it. All the guys in the city, let's get circumcised. Verse 21, hey, look. Let's do this thing and do all this. Verse 23, because then once they marry into us, we're going to get all their stuff. So they all go out and they're circumcised because they think they're going to not only get Dinah, but also they're going to somehow double-cross Jacob's family. Here's the point I'm trying to make here, verse 25. Well, when they're still recovering from the surgery, Simeon and Levi, they go on a bloodthirsty raid. Listen, they take their swords against the city and they kill all the men in the city. Then they rescue Dinah. They plundered the city and they take all the possessions and they take possession, verse 29, of the children and the wives of the dead men they've just slaughtered. It's an incredibly violent, nasty scenario. Verse 30, Jacob says to them when he hears about it, you've caused a problem for me. But they said, verse 31, what? You're gonna let our sister be treated like a whore? And Jacob says nothing about it. And the narrator just moves on. Which son is gonna lead the family? Okay, now, going back to where we are, where the DVR is paused, and chapter 42, verse 23. They're talking in the dungeon, they're talking there in Egypt. They don't know that Joseph understands them. Verse 24, he turns away and wept. Then he spoke to them, and he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. This is just my conjecture, it's not in the Bible. But I'm wondering if Simeon, whom we know is bloodthirsty because we see that he'd killed all those men in that village, I'm wondering if Simeon was one of the instigators of the plan to murder Joseph. I'm wondering if it's not just at random, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, that Joseph causes Simeon to be bound and kept behind. I'm wondering if there's a reason for it. Either way, they keep Simeon and they send them all the guys back. And they go back, verse 29, to Jacob, and they tell him everything that happened. Verse 35, you know the story probably if you've been in Sunday school. They open their bags, and their money that they had tried to give to buy the grain is still in their bags. And they were afraid, verse 36, and Jacob says, this kind of whining speech, you have bereaved me of my children. Jacob is no more, Simeon is no more, and now you take Benjamin? All this has come against me. Now remember, Reuben is indisciplined, and he's an idiot. Because look what he says here. Look at his solution is. This is so stupid. Reuben says, hey, Dad, you can kill my sons if I don't bring him back to you. So the problem here is the future of the family is at stake. They're all about to die, and Reuben takes the family's future and says, I will let you use that as collateral. Kill my sons, Dad. I mean, it's so stupid. Doesn't work. Nobody even replies to him. This is how you know that Reuben is a complete idiot, because nobody even responds to answer him. He's just saying it over the family. Hey, Pop, you can have my sons, kill them. And Jacob says in verse 38, My son's not going to go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he's the only one left. Which kind of breaks your heart, doesn't it? Because there's actually 10 boys with him right there, but the only one Jacob cares about is the littlest one, Benjamin. If this will happen, I'll have to go to the place of the dead. Verse 43, the next week's series begins, the next episode begins. Now it's real bad. And their dad says, verse 2, hey, go buy some food, guys, in Egypt. Judah says, hey, Pop, we have been over this. The guy in Egypt said, you can't go unless you bring your brother. Verse 6, Israel said, why'd you treat me so badly to tell the man that you had another brother? They said, Pop, we've told you this. He weaseled it out of us. How are we supposed to know? Verse 8, Judah, the fourth son. Remember Judah back in chapter 38, that weird story? Weird story where he's humiliated morally and he realizes, I wonder if anyone in here has ever been in that moment when you were quick to judge. You had the rock raised in your hand, ready to throw it if the woman caught in the act of adultery. And then all of a sudden, Jesus flips it back on you, and you realize that you're not actually any better than the person you are judging. Jesus says, beware the manner you judge, because with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. Remember that with Judah? He's about to have his daughter-in-law burned at the stake, and then he realizes that he is the guilty party. Judah here speaks up. Judah says, verse 8, hey, Pop, send the boy Benjamin with me, that we're going to go and live and not die, because we're going to die here. I will be the pledge of his safety. If I don't bring him back, let me bear the blame. And Pop, by the way, verse 10, if we hadn't been sitting here talking, we could already have been there and back twice. Dad, we're going to die here. And Israel says, okay. So notice, it's Judah right here who begins to unlock the door. He says, Pop, this is how it's going to be, and I will stand in the place. If I don't bring him back, you take my life. So they go down to Egypt with Benjamin. Verse 16, Joseph sees Benjamin, and they make a big party. And they're afraid, verse 18, because they're brought to Joseph's house, and they're not sure what's going to happen. But he says, don't be afraid, verse 23, your God is with you. So he brings out Simeon. So they're all reunited. Verse 24, they wash their feet, they fodder the donkeys. Verse 26, Joseph came home, and they bring him in, and he talks to them. Verse 27, is your dad alive? How's it going? They say, yeah, he's alive. Verse 29, and he lifted up his eyes, and he saw Benjamin, his mother's son. Now, again, think about this in terms of cinematography. How powerful is this moment? He saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. He said, is this the boy that you talked about? Verse 30, then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber, and he wept there. Then he washed his face, he came out, and he eats separate from them because they don't eat together. Verse 33, but he arranges them all in order of their birth, which they're surprised at. How does this guy know the order of our birth? And then verse 34, the youngest one has 5 times more food, and they have a big party. And it's like he's trying to activate their jealousy. Remember, it was their jealousy that caused them to murder or to try to murder him and sell him into slavery. And now he's trying to do the same thing with Benjamin. He gives Benjamin way more. Well, the story goes on. He sets them up. As they leave, he puts a special little jewelry sorcerer's cup in Benjamin's sack, and they find it. They open it up. Verse 14, when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. And they fell before him. This is 45:14. Joseph said, what have you done? Don't you know that a man like me can practice divination? Now we know that the whole thing has been a setup, but he sets him up. And Judah said, notice who's speaking for the family. It's Judah. Judah said, what shall we say, my Lord? What shall we speak? How can we clear ourselves? Listen to this sentence. God has found out the guilt of your servants. The guilt. Which guilt is he talking about? We are my Lord's servants. We are the ones whose cup has been found. He says, I'm not going to hold all of you responsible. Verse 17, only the one whose hand the cup was found. The rest of you can go. I'm keeping the little one. And Judah says, my Lord, please listen to me. You're like Pharaoh. Verse 19, You asked us, do we have a dad? Do we have a brother? And we said, yeah, we have an old dad and a little brother. Verse 21, we said, you got to bring the little boy to me. We said, we can't. If the little boy leaves his dad, our dad's going to die. And we went back, verse 24, we told our dad this, but you said it has to happen, so we brought him down here. And my dad said, if you don't bring the boy back, I'm going to die. Verse 30, listen to this. Therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, the old man's going to die. Verse 32, because I have pledged my life for the boy. Verse 33, listen, it's the climactic moment of the story. Hey, I'll stay. Take me. Take me instead of the boy. Let the boy go back, because I can't go back to my dad without the little one with me. Chapter 45, verse 1, Joseph could not control himself. He cries, everybody needs to leave. And then he reveals himself to his brothers, and he weeps so loud in verse 2 that the people outside the room can hear about it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. I mean, it is such a powerful scene. If you know anything about human nature, you have to just feel the pathos of the scene. The moment where Judah changes the whole narrative by stepping forward and offering himself in place of Benjamin. These boys have been so selfish, so violent, so bloodthirsty. But the reason we were told in Genesis 38 about Judah's humiliation, I think, is so we understand what's happening in his character as he's maturing. And now he gives his life in place of his brother. And that sacrifice, let the reader understand, that sacrifice, the one for the other, is what unlocks the door and changes everything. And Joseph can't hold it anymore, and he reveals himself to his brothers. And then he says, go back to Jacob, bring him down. Okay. So they bring him all down, chapter 46, we're coming near to the end here. They bring him all down, they settle in Egypt, and Joseph takes care of him because Joseph is really important. Verse 47, chapter 47 rather. They settle in Egypt. And in chapter 47, Joseph says to Pharaoh, hey, my papa's coming. And Pharaoh says, I'd like to meet him. And he arranges a meeting. Verse 7. This is so cool. Joseph brought in Jacob, his father, and he stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Remember? God says to Abraham, I will bless other people through you. Pharaoh's like a god. Jacob is an old man with gray hair, with dirty feet. And notice what happens. It's God's man who blesses Pharaoh. I love it, love it, love it, love it. Pharaoh says, how old are you, old timer? Verse 8, Jacob says, the years of my sojourning are 130. Few and evil have been the days of my life. And Joseph, verse 11, settled his father in the best part of Egypt. And Joseph provided his father and his brothers and his father's house with food. But Joseph doesn't go to live with them. Which son is going to lead the family? Joseph doesn't go and live with the family. I think the picture you get is that Joseph is totally Egyptianized. Even though he's reunited with his family, he never really rejoins them, as we'll see. So finally the famine comes. Joseph buys up all the land of Egypt on behalf of Pharaoh. I think it's a morally questionable thing that happens there. We can come back to that in another moment. So they make it through the time of the famine, and here we are, Genesis chapter 47, verse 29. We're coming near the end of the story. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son, Joseph, and said, I want you to promise me. Verse 29, do not bury me in Egypt. Don't bury me in Egypt. I don't want to die outside the promised land. Don't bury me in Egypt. And Joseph says, I promise. Now, chapter 48, verse 1. Joseph gets the word from the nursing home. Your father doesn't have a whole long time to live. Hospice care calls him. So look at this moment. So cool. He takes with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And they told Jacob, verse 2, Joseph's here. Israel summoned his strength, sat up in bed. And Jacob says in verse 5, I'm going to take your sons as my sons. They're going to be my boys now, and I want to bless them. Verse 8, so Israel saw Joseph's sons. He said, who are these? Joseph said, Pop, these are my sons. We just went over this, whom God has given me. He said, bring them to me. I want to bless them. Santino, my son. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he could not see. This is so awesome. Everybody, pay attention to this. Israel's eyes are dim with age. You can imagine like the milky white cataracts on his eyes. So Joseph brings the boys to them. Israel says to Joseph, I never expected to see your face. God has let me see your boys too. Joseph bows down. And Joseph, verse 13, takes them both. Watch. Ephraim on his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand. So Manasseh is on this side of the bed, on Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim is on this side, on Jacob's left hand. Watch what happens. Israel, verse 14, stretches out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who is the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, who is older. Like this. Look. Jacob does this. He switches his hands. He's going to bless the younger son. He's blind, and you think he's out of it? He sees everything. Verse 17, Joseph says, Pop, it's not how it's supposed to happen. Not this way. Verse 19, his father refused and said, I know what I'm doing, boy. He shall become a people. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater. Second half of verse 20, thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Jacob does what God has been doing. He picks the younger one and raises him up above the elder. Then Israel says, I'm going to bless you, and he does. And then verse 40, chapter 49, we're almost at the end. This is the second to last week of the mini-series. He gathers all the sons together, and what you're going to see is this old blind man who, remember, has been walking with a limp for decades. He has seen everything. Listen to what he says. Reuben, chapter 49, verse 3. This is his deathbed blessing. You are my firstborn, my might, the first fruits of my strength. Verse 4. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed and you defiled it. Remember all those decades before? Jacob remembers. Verse 5, Simeon and Levi, they're the ones who go in and murder all the men of Shechem and steal all the women and children. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul not come into their counsel, or my glory be not joined to their company, for in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger. Now we come to the fourth son, Judah. Your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. Verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until tribute comes to him. This is why we talk about the Lion of Judah, right here, because of this beautiful prophecy and prayer. And then it goes on to all the other boys that he has something to say about all of them, and it turns out he has seen everything and missed nothing. Now here it is. Verse 28, chapter 49. These are the 12 tribes. The 12 sons become the 12 tribes. And this is how he blessed them. And he said in verse 29, bury me with my fathers. Don't let me stay here. Verse 33, think of the moment. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Then Joseph, chapter 50, verse 1, he falls and he weeps over him. And Joseph commanded the servants to embalm his father. So they do it. And then Joseph says, hey, I need to bury my dad back home, Pharaoh. Can I have some leave of absence? And Pharaoh says, verse 6, absolutely, you do it. So they all go. And they show up. And Pharaoh's people come with them, like this huge company. Verse 10, and when they come to the place in the promised land, they have a huge funeral procession, a very great and grievous lamentation. Verse 11, and when the people who live in the promised land, the country folks who are there, they're like, woo-wee, we ain't never seen nothing like this. This a grievous mourning by the Egyptians, and his sons did for him. Now here it is. I love this scene. I need you to see it. I need you to see it with your mind. Thus his sons did for him what he had commanded them. Verse 13, all 12. The first and last time all 12 are reunited. Look at the movement. His sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him. The 12 sons of Jacob, lockstep with their father's body on their shoulders. Isn't that powerful? This strange, brilliant, tenacious, flawed man, Jacob, who becomes Israel with the permanent limp because he wrestles with God. His 12 sons, for the first and last time, are united in his death. They carry him on their shoulders and they bury him. And here's the final scene. Verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw their father was dead, they said, he's going to get us back now. And they say, please forgive us. Verse 17. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. We don't know why he weeps. Does he weep at the grievous loss of his father? Does he weep at all the years they lost? Does he weep remembering the time in the pit and all the misery of being a slave? Or does he weep because he finally just lets it go? He just lets it go. Look what he says, one of the great verses in Scripture. Verse 19, Joseph said, don't fear. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Don't fear. Don't fear. And to his credit, Joseph never seeks vengeance on his brothers. Verse 22. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. And he saw his sons and his grandsons. In verse 24, he says to the Hebrews, I'm going to die, but God's going to visit you one day and bring you up out of this land. Verse 25, Joseph says, you got to promise, don't leave my bones here. Verse 26, so Joseph died being 110 years old. Now here's the last sentence of the book of Genesis, and it will break your heart and take your breath away. Listen. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. The book of Genesis comes to a close with Joseph, this most brilliant member of God's people, literally being buried as a mummy in Egypt. And the thing closes. And you're just sitting there in the theater and you're just like, wow. It finishes with him literally as a mummy in Egypt. And like all great stories, it's over and it's not over. And the end of the one is the beginning of the next one. And that's the story of Jacob's 11th brilliant son, Joseph, and his brothers. The end. How great is the Bible? So we'll have a little bit of time there. A little bit of time for some Q&A. We'll wrap up on time, I promise. So what we normally do is we'll just shout it out. We have like a microphone. And absolutely, if you were in middle school and high school, we'll totally give you a prize for asking a question. I promise we'll be done at 8 o'clock. We have about 20 minutes. And anything is fair game. Ribbon has our orange talk box. There we go. All right, we have some questions here. Okay, I think I saw Kate Linsenmeyer first. Your hand was first.
Do you think that these stories of sacrifice, like Abraham and Judah, lead us to the story of the sacrifice of Jesus?
So Kate's saying, do I think the story of sacrifice of Judah is leading us to Jesus? Absolutely. And what I mean by that is this. God puts into reality certain patterns that just work over and over and over again. And God has built the universe up in such a way that when you sacrifice yourself in love, it changes the reality of the relationship. Always and everywhere, that's true. Sacrifices unlock doors that seemed impassable. And so Judah doing that is absolutely a type of what Jesus will do later, but Jesus does it the ultimate way. And the reason Jesus' sacrifice works is because that's how God has set up the world. Absolutely, you're supposed to be seeing that. Well done. Yeah, let's see, I had Sutton, and then we'll do Henry, and then we'll have back here.
How come how come God wasn't present when Joseph was thrown into the pit? Like, how come he didn't interfere with that?
Okay, see, this is why we need to have the young people here, because they ask the brilliant questions. Sutton's question is, why does God permit Joseph to be thrown into the pit? I'm gonna have to ask you another question back, young grasshopper, okay? Here's my question, Sutton. Why does the Father permit Jesus to go to the cross? And the ultimate answer is, we don't really know. But the Father redeems suffering. And so sometimes in this world, the things that are meant for evil, God permits because later on he is able to use them for good, which is what Joseph tells his brothers. What you intended for evil, God will do for good. The problem is, and why suffering is so hard, is because when you're in the moment, you cannot see the ending of it. And that's why suffering will break your heart. But what we as the people of God know is that God will redeem suffering. And though other people might use things for evil, God is so powerful that he can raise the dead and turn the crucifixion into the resurrection and use it for good. But nevertheless, in this life, we still live with the mystery of why God permits it. And the short answer is we don't really know. The longer answer is God does something beautiful with it. Great question. Henry, we'll get everybody's question. We'll move quick. Yes, Henry.
Is there any other reason besides Jacob loved Joseph, like the colorful coat? Is there any other reason behind that?
Why you're asking why Jacob loves Joseph? I think because Jacob loves Joseph's mom, and he prefers Rachel. It's very clear that he loves Rachel more than the others, his other wives, and it's because he spoils them. He's the youngest at the time, and he spoils them. Yeah. Yes, I can't quite see who that is back there behind Sean. Yeah, is that Ruthie? Yeah.
This is a little random, but why did Jacob rip like Joseph's robe and then went to, is it Shaul?
Yes, so Ruthie's saying, why does he rip the robe? What you do, I'm not gonna do it all the way. I have an undershirt on, but I have snaps on my shirt. In the ancient world, when you're grieving, you kind of like rip your clothes. It's just, Ruthie, it's just a way of kind of saying, I'm really upset. Yeah. I'll keep going with the young people. Other questions back over here. Who is that between, yeah, there you go. Between Bonnie, go ahead.
No, that was Addison.
Go ahead.
My question is, what is the definition of the color of the robes? Like, what is that, the definition of that?
Yeah, so the question is about the word used to describe the robe of many colors. It's a word we don't really know what it means because it's ancient Hebrew and the word is only found one time. It's something about the type of clothing, and so traditionally we have translated it into English as many colors, but we're not totally sure what it means. Let's see. Okay, yes, sir, right here, and Jackie, I'll get you. Yes, sir.
My question is, would it be safe to say that Joseph brought godly tithing with him when he went to Egypt as the first fruits?
So the question is this?
He had a lot of favor from God through all of it.
Yeah, the question is Joseph sort of bringing the principle of tithing with him in Egypt? I don't think I have an answer one way or the other on that. I'm not sure. It's a good thought, but I don't know. Could be a positive way to see the favor, yes. Very clearly, God is blessing Joseph's socks off and everybody else. Which again, Sutton, this kind of goes back to your question. He was thrown in the pit, and then later on, he's in charge of everything in Egypt. So, when is God with him or not with him? We'll do Jack, and then I'll come back over here, and yes.
Okay, so when Jacob, he has children with Zilpah and Bilhah because his wife told him to. Is that another example of male passivity, or is there another reason for that?
Yeah, so the question is Jacob's willingness to have children with these maids or slaves, we could say slaves, is that an example of male passivity? Yes. Now, we've seen this story before. And you remember about Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Ishmael? Did that end well? No. And here we have the same thing happening again. And it's exactly, he's refusing to take responsibility for himself. He's just, okay, whatever. Jacob is a total mess. I love him. But he's a complete mess and a contradiction kind of always. And he has good qualities and bad qualities. And his willingness to kind of be pushed along in this way is not a good thing. Just as the fact that he doesn't remonstrate with his sons who murder all the people, or the fact when Reuben sleeps with the woman that he slept with, he doesn't do anything about it. He remembers it, he sees it, but he doesn't speak to it, and it causes problems. Male passivity causes problems. I think, Jack, what I would probably say is his overall passivity among his sons is what causes the murderous thing. These are boys that are gifted and headstrong, and they need to be pushed out of the family to kind of make their own way, but they all stay in the family, which is not God's design. Remember, God's design is you leave your father and mother and you go and be united to a new family. They all stay there, and they hate each other, and they're violent, and bad stuff goes on, and Jacob sort of sees it but won't do anything about it. I know almost nothing about pretty much anything, but I know this. If you have boys in your household, if you have brothers, particularly if you have boys, they need clear boundaries. They need their father to put up boundaries, because boys are a mess, okay? I know that. It's all the sisters, all the girls that are clapping. Yeah, any other questions here? Do we have anything over here? We want to go back over this way. There's a hand back there, can't quite see, next to the Coopers. And then we'll come back over here, guys.
When Joseph was in the pit, he said, let's not kill him. Let's come up with another alternative.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take his life. And you sort of hinted all along in the readings, like which one of these boys is going to be the one to carry on the family tradition. But Judah kind of started to show his turning at that point.
Yeah, maybe. So the observation is Judah's the one who says, guys, why are we going to kill him? Let's just sell him into slavery. So the narrator doesn't tell us. Maybe Judah is like trying not to kill their brother. But what he says is, what are we going to get out of it if we kill him? But if we sell him, we get some money. So I'm not sure at this moment if it's meant to be favorable or not, but I do know that Judah is particularly highlighted. So if you went through with a highlighter in your Bible and colored Reuben's name, Levi's name, Simeon's name, Judah's name, and see which names occur, you begin to see a pattern, and the narrator sort of weaving it toward Judah over time. Whether he's good in that moment or not, I don't know. And maybe we're not meant to know. Maybe that's the beauty of the ambiguity there, but great observation. It's actually Judah's plan to sell him into slavery. There. Yeah, back over here. You want to toss it, Ribbon? You played softball. Let's see what you got. Yeah, there you go. Bonnie, is that you? You have a question?
Me?
Okay.
Lindsay.
Okay, go ahead.
When was that? Was Joseph's mummy ever found?
Okay, so this is why we have to have good questions. The question is, when is Joseph's mummy ever found? Here we go, pull out your Bible. Turn to Exodus 13:19. This is why the Bible is so great. Exodus 13:19. Exodus is the story of the Exodus, the coming out of God's people. After the Passover, remember what does Moses say? Let my people go. Absolutely. And Pharaoh finally, against his will, does it. Turn to Exodus 13:17. Here we go, just to set it up. And this is why if you don't pay attention, you come to these weird details, you go, who cares? Here we go. Exodus 13:17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds. But God led the people around by way of the wilderness. And the people of Israel went out in the land of Egypt equipped for battle. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him. For Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, carry me up my bones with you. Verse 20, and they moved on to Sukkot, and the story continues. So this is a little throwaway line, and the answer is yes. But you know what I like about that? First of all, I love the connections between the Bible. I love it. I love it. With the Lord, ultimately, there will be no loose ends. It's all going to be tied up neatly, which goes back to your question, Sutton. Why is the suffering? One day God will make it all totally clear. Even the bones of Joseph are remembered in the Exodus. Isn't that great? Other questions we have, a few more minutes here. Yes, over here. Yes, ma'am. Yes, thank you for asking that question. So, you know how sometimes baseball cards are more valuable when there's an error in the printing? Okay, if you turn to page 13 in our guide, which is tomorrow's reading, we read Genesis 39, page 13 in our Genesis reading guide. It's Joseph with Potiphar. It's all great. Look at the last verse, chapter 6. He left all that he had in Joseph's care, and because of him, he had no concern about anything. That's Thursday's reading. And then the reading picks up again, not Friday, but Monday, with Joseph in prison. I totally forgot all about how Joseph ends up in prison in the reading for Friday, and it's my mistake, my omission, but now these books will be valuable. So if you go to my website or if you're on the email list, I've written a reading and a verse for Friday, Genesis chapter 39, verses 7 and following, but we skipped it in the book. I don't know how, we just did. So, my fault. Great question, thank you for asking that. Other questions over here, and then we'll throw it back. Okay.
Why is the robe so important?
The robe is important. First of all, it's important because it's great for a little kid's storybook, the many-colored book, right? It's so vivid. It's like Noah and the rainbow and everything in the 2x2. The reason it's important is because every time his brothers see Joseph, okay, this is not 2022. There's not racks and racks of clothes at Kohl's that you can buy. You make clothes, and clothes are normally like a dirty brown color. So like purple dye, for example, comes from a certain shellfish, and that's why it's associated with royalty in the time of the New Testament. So color matters. So every time the brothers see Joseph, it's obvious to everybody that their father loves their 11th brother more than them. So it's like this way of just throwing it in their face all the time. That's why the robe matters. And that's why I think why the brothers rip it and put the blood on it and then give it to their dad. It's like they're so angry at it. Great question. Other questions? Yes, over here, and then I'll look back over here.
How do you think the brothers felt when he announced that it was Joseph?
Yeah, what a great question. How do you think the brothers felt when Joseph says, I'm Joseph? Well, the Bible tells us, so open it up here. I'll tell you how they don't feel. Happy. It is Genesis 45, 1 and following. Genesis 45, 1. Then Joseph could not control himself. Remember what happened right before? Judah sacrifices himself. It's the sacrifice that changes everything. Genesis 45, 1, Joseph could not control himself. He says, get everybody out of here. Verse 2, he weeps so loud that the people out of the room can hear it. Joseph, verse 3, says, it's me. But his brothers could not answer him. Why? For they were dismayed at his presence. I think they're overcome by terror and guilt and fear because they know what they did. And now the living proof of their sin is brought right back in front of them. Very similar to what happens with Judah and Tamar so many decades before. Jackson, you want to shout it out, and then I'll get you, Bonnie.
Did Jacob keep Joseph's, the rainbow coat after the brothers brought it back with all the blood on it?
So Jackson is asking, did Jacob keep the rainbow coat? So if you remember, if you turn to Genesis 37, you have this bloody, ripped coat. Verse 33, Genesis 37, 33. Jacob identifies it and says, it's my son's robe. An animal must have devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces, and he tore his own garments, and he cries. We don't know, but I don't think it's a crazy leap to think that maybe Joseph kept holding on to that because it was like the thing of his dead son, his lost son. Great image. Yeah. Another question back here. Bonnie, go ahead.
Why was it so normal to have a lot of children with a lot of different women?
Yeah, so Bonnie's question is, why was it normal to have a lot of children with a lot of women? See, this is one of the problems with the current cultural moment we're in that acts like that men and women are the same. They're interchangeable. It's crazy. It's totally insane and it doesn't work and everybody knows it. But men and women are not the same. And one of the things that marriage does is that marriage takes two unlike things and fits them together well. Men and women are different. Now, from a purely sort of natural, biological thing, a woman can only be pregnant one at a time. But a man could get lots of women pregnant. So if you have a farm, you only need one bull, even if you have a bunch of cows, right? And so in the same way, what marriage does, it's not a great metaphor, okay. Cut that from the tape, okay. I'm talking extemporaneously up here, all right? What marriage does is that it takes the male sexual instinct and locks it down, it tames it. This is one of the reasons why homosexual relationships are always so sexually active, because you don't have kind of the taming instinct of women with men together. And so what happens, though, is that men have always wanted to abuse women. That's from the very beginning, and it's happening up to this present. All sexual sin ultimately really hurts women and hurts children. Always. It's how it's always been, and we see it in this current cultural moment. And so, Bonnie, to answer your question, men want what they want, and because men are bigger and stronger and more violent, and because men don't bear the consequences in their own bodies of sex, though women get pregnant, men have always desired to have as many sexual partners as possible. And God's design for marriage is to fit men and women together. It's why God's design is so good. But what happens here in the Bible is also, it really matters to have sons to carry on your name after you, because sons will help take care of you. So you want to try to have as many sons as possible. So Jacob is driven by his own desires. He doesn't control them, they control him, and he wants to have as many sons as possible. But people often want to know, well, if polygamy is wrong, then why is it in the Bible? Have you been reading along about the character of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Are they moral exemplars? No. And I don't know if you've been reading or not. Does polygamy work out well for anybody in the Bible? No. It's always a disaster, which is not that hard to have forecast if you know anything about human nature. So it is normal for men to behave this way. This is important. Everybody listen, particularly younger people. Listen. Just because something is normal or natural doesn't mean that it's right. Can I prove it to you? If you hit me, you know what my natural desire is? To hit you back even harder. And little kids do it naturally. But Jesus says, love your enemies. In fact, he says, be born again. Paul says in Romans chapter 12, don't be conformed to this world, but have your mind, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So though something feels normal to us, seems natural to us, is not the way that God is calling us, because he's calling us to be more than just the animals or the dust of the earth, but to bear his image. And that's his design for us. And one of the things that Genesis is teaching us is that humanity left for itself has no hope. Even the family that God chooses is a mess. But centuries later, through the strange vagaries of history, what did we already read? From the line of Judah comes Jesus, who dies in place of sinful humanity, and then calls people to them and pours out his Spirit on them and begins to remake them in accordance with his original intent. And that's the good news of the gospel. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Why don't you stand up to your feet? I want to pray for you tonight. There are prayers in our guide. I'm going to pray this evening prayer to you. Hey, you guys over here, middle school, high school students, these prayers are so good. I didn't write them. They're from the Book of Common Prayer. Listen to this prayer for evening. Let's pray together. I love it. Oh God, hear our prayers. Lord, the life of all who live, the light of the faithful, the strength of those who labor, and the repose of the dead. We thank you for the blessings of the day that is past, and humbly ask for your protection through the coming night, and so thereby bring us in safety to the morning hours. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night.